I was brought before the Alpha as a sacrifice, a broken thing meant to appease his fury. The pack called me worthless, an omega with no bite, no worth but to bow and bleed. So why, when his blazing eyes met mine, did the only thing my soul whisper was home? Every wolf in the pack had come to watch, to judge, to sneer. I kept my head down, my bare feet sinking into the cold dirt. If I didn't meet their eyes, maybe I could pretend I wasn't here. Maybe I could pretend I was still hidden away in the attic, clutching my sketches of forests and wolves that would never cage me. But Marcus, my uncle, my jailer, would never allow me that mercy. He yanked me forward until I stumbled into the firelight. His voice rang out, deep and cruel, meant to carry over the pack. This girl is nothing, a disgrace to her blood. She defies me. She shames this family. Tonight, before her pack, she will learn her place. A ripple of laughter and growls spread through the wolves circling us. I felt their eyes burn against my skin. My heart hammered like a rabbit caught in a snare. And then his hand struck me. The slap cracked like thunder in the night. My head snapped sideways, the taste of blood sharp on my tongue. The world tilted. The fire roared. My ears rang with silence. No one moved to help me. No one ever had. Until the growl came. It rolled from the shadows beyond the fire, low and lethal, shaking the ground beneath my feet. Every head turned. Wolves stiffened, ears flattening, tails lowering in instinctive submission. From the darkness, he stepped forward. The savage Alpha, Gabriel. His gaze found Marcus's hand still raised against me. His golden eyes burned, not with the cruelty I had grown used to, but with something far more dangerous. And in that instant, though I was still trembling and bleeding, though fear gnawed at every bone in my body, my soul whispered the word it had never known before. Mate. Lily sat cross-legged on the rough wooden floor of the attic, her charcoal-stained fingers moving with quiet desperation. On the scrap of paper before her, a wolf emerged in careful strokes, its back arched, its jaws open in a soundless cry of freedom. Behind it, she sketched trees that rose taller than the sky, their leaves touched with imagined silver light. This world on paper was the only one where she belonged. The attic smelled of dust and timber, of secrets left to rot. Light seeped through a narrow window, cutting through the gloom in a single golden beam. Dust motes danced within it like sparks, fragile and fleeting. Lily's world was fragile too. Every line she drew was a prayer, silent pleas for a life beyond the cage Marcus had built for her. Her parents had been betas, strong and respected. They had died one night in screams and fire. She had survived. That single fact had become the foundation of Marcus's cruelty. In his eyes, her survival was not a blessing, but a weakness that demanded punishment. He was her guardian, her blood, yet he treated her as little more than a debt he never meant to forgive. The floor creaked outside the attic door. Lily froze, her charcoal snapping in half between her fingers. Marcus never climbed the ladder. He always sent others. That sound meant he had come himself. The door banged open. He filled the frame, broad-shouldered, his presence devouring the fragile piece she had carved for herself. His eyes were hard and flat, the color of muddy water. They landed on her drawing. Still wasting time with these little messes? His voice dripped with disdain. Lily didn't answer. She never did. Words gave him weapons. Silence was her only shield, brittle though it was. Marcus stepped inside, his boots grinding against the floorboards. He studied the wolf she had drawn, the forest around it, and sneered. Pathetic. Your parents were legends. Their strength protected this pack. And you? You hide in the dust and scratch at paper like a child. What use are you to anyone? Lily's throat tightened, but she kept her eyes on her stained fingers. If she looked up, if she let him see her fear, it would only please him more. He sighed, A long, theatrical sound. Enough games. A messenger came. You've been summoned to the gathering. The Alpha himself will judge you. Her head snapped up. The gathering? That sacred circle was reserved for matters of law and dominance, territory disputes, punishments, trials. Omegas like her weren't called to stand there. The smile Marcus gave her was sharp and thin, like the edge of a knife. Perhaps now you'll learn some respect. He turned and left the door open, letting the cold air rush in. The sunlight no longer felt warm. It showed the grime, the dust, the cracks in the boards. The attic was no sanctuary now. It was only another cage, and the door had been flung wide, leading not to freedom, but into a far deadlier prison.
The gathering grounds were alive with fire and fury. Torches blazed in a wide ring, their flames snapping in the wind, casting long shadows across the clearing. The scent of pine and smoke mixed with the heavier musk of wolves in their human skins, all pressed close to watch what promised to be blood or shame. Lily's steps faltered as Marcus pushed her forward, his hand clamped like an iron shackle around her arm. Every eye followed them. She could feel the weight of the stairs, the whispers slithering around her like smoke. An Omega? Here? She's nothing. She's worthless. Why would the Alpha waste his time? The words pierced her, each one sharper than claws. She kept her eyes fixed on the ground, watching her bare toes sink into the cold dirt. If she didn't look at them, maybe she could endure. Maybe. They reached the center of the circle. The earth there was packed hard from years of trials and challenges. This was the heart of the pack, the place where dominance was displayed, where wolves fought for honor, where justice was delivered. She didn't belong here. She wasn't a fighter. She wasn't anything. Marcus released her with a shove that nearly sent her sprawling. He stepped forward, raising his voice to carry across the gathered wolves. "This girl," he spat, "has mocked this pack with her disobedience. She refuses the matches I've arranged, scorns the hand that feeds her, and dares to act above her station. She is an Omega who does not know her place." A murmur of disapproval rippled through the crowd. Lily felt it like a storm pressing against her skin. She wanted to sink into the earth, to disappear, but Marcus wasn't finished. "She brings shame to my household," he thundered. "Tonight, before her Alpha, before her pack, she will learn the meaning of respect." Before she could brace herself, his hand cracked across her face. The sound was sharp, cruel, echoing like a whip through the night. Pain exploded across her cheek. Her knees buckled, and the world swam. She tasted blood, copper, and salt on her tongue. The silence that followed was worse than the slap. The entire pack froze, their whispers stilled. Every wolf was watching. Every wolf saw her shame. And then the growl came. It was not Marcus's. It was not any ordinary wolf's. It rolled from the shadows beyond the fire, deep and resonant, a sound that shook the earth beneath her feet. Wolves nearest the fire flinched, their heads bowing, their shoulders lowering instinctively. From the edge of the circle he stepped forward. Gabriel, the savage Alpha. His eyes burned like molten gold, locked not on her but on Marcus's raised hand. Each step he took was deliberate, the weight of a predator closing in on prey. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but it carried like thunder across the clearing. "Touch her again, and die."
The growl lingered in the night air, heavy and unrelenting. Wolves shifted uncomfortably, some lowering their gazes, others baring their throats in submission though Gabriel had not asked it of them. His presence was enough. Lily's cheek burned, a sharp reminder of Marcus's hand. She dared not lift her head, not with the entire pack watching, but her heart hammered so hard she thought it might shake her bones apart. Marcus straightened his shoulders, defiance flashing in his eyes. "With respect, Alpha," he began, his voice oily with false humility. "This is a family matter. The girl is mine to discipline." Gabriel's eyes narrowed, the firelight catching in the amber depths. He stepped closer, each stride deliberate, his boots sinking into the hard-packed earth of the gathering grounds. When he stopped, his shadow fell over both Lily and Marcus. "No wolf under my sky is yours to break," Gabriel said, his voice low, controlled, yet edged with lethal promise. "You raised your hand against her in front of the pack. You raised your hand against her in front of me." The murmurs that spread through the circle were different now. Uneasy. Expectant. Marcus's jaw tightened. He had always thrived on dominance games, on twisting weakness into leverage, but tonight the ground shifted beneath him. Still, he sneered, playing the only card he had left. He reached down and yanked Lily by the arm, jerking her to her feet. She stumbled, her face still throbbing from the blow. "Look at her," Marcus snarled, his grip bruising. "She is nothing. A useless omega who refuses her place, who rejects every chance for a mate, who mocks this pack with her insolence. Would you waste your protection on this scrap?" Gasps echoed, and for the first time, Lily felt something break. Not in her body, but in her spirit. She had been humiliated in silence for so long, but never before like this. Not before every eye in the pack. Shame curled like fire in her gut. Gabriel's gaze locked on Marcus's hand clutching Lily's arm. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his head, meeting Marcus's eyes with a look that froze the air. "Release her." Marcus hesitated, and that pause was his undoing. Gabriel moved, quicker than breath, quicker than thought. His hand clamped around Marcus's wrist, prying his fingers from Lily's arm as though they were nothing but twigs. The sound of bone straining under his grip made Marcus pale. The savage alpha leaned closer, his voice a deadly whisper that cut through the silence. "Touch her again, and you will not leave this circle alive." He shoved Marcus backward, forcing him to stumble into the dirt. A ripple spread through the crowd, wolves bowing their heads, the scent of fear thickening in the air. The balance of power had shifted, and every wolf knew it. Lily stood frozen, her arm tingling where Gabriel had freed her. The fire roared, the night pressed close, and for the first time in her life, she felt the weight of a shield standing before her. Not because she deserved it, but because the savage alpha had claimed it.
The circle had fallen into silence, the kind that thrummed in the marrow of every wolf present. No one dared move, no one dared breathe too loudly. All eyes were fixed on the man standing tall at the heart of the gathering grounds, Gabriel, the savage alpha. Marcus still crouched where Gabriel had shoved him, his face pale, his wrist trembling from the strength that had nearly snapped it. His mouth opened, but no words came. Fear had robbed him of them. Gabriel turned from him with deliberate slowness, his gaze sweeping across the assembled pack. Torches hissed in the night air, flames bending toward him as though even fire sought his command. "You forget yourselves," Gabriel said, his voice deep, steady, carrying to every ear. "An omega is not prey to be broken for your amusement. She is pack, and in my pack, no wolf is less than another." A stir went through the crowd, some lowering their heads, others shifting uneasily. It was not custom to hear such words. Omegas had always been treated as shadows, useful only for labor, silent and unseen. Gabriel's hand flexed at his side, his eyes flashing like molten gold. "This girl," he gestured to Lily, still frozen in place, her cheeks flushed with shame, "has been struck before you all, not because she failed, but because cruelty was convenient. That ends tonight." Marcus staggered to his feet, desperation twisting his features. "Alpha, you cannot mean. She is worthless. She brings nothing but shame." Gabriel's head snapped toward him, the weight of his glare silencing Marcus instantly. The savage alpha's growl rumbled from deep within his chest, primal and commanding. "Enough! You have spoken too long, and your words are rot." The circle of wolves shifted back, their instincts bending before Gabriel's fury. Power rolled from him like heat from a forge, thick and suffocating. He took a step closer to Lily, not touching her, but standing near enough that his presence alone shielded her. "She is under my protection," Gabriel declared. His voice was iron, absolute. "From this night forward, any hand raised against her will answer to me." The words struck the pack like a thunderclap. Shock rippled outward. Protection from an alpha was no small claim. It was law, it was binding, and it was dangerous. Lily's breath caught in her throat. Her uncle's grip, his slap, the humiliation, all of it blurred as she heard those words. Protection. It had never been hers before. The murmurs swelled again, sharp with disbelief. Some wolves bowed their heads in swift obedience. Others exchanged wary glances. But no one, not even Marcus, dared challenge the savage alpha's decree. Gabriel's eyes swept the circle once more, daring any to defy him. None did. The fire snapped, the shadows deepened, and the gathering grounds bore witness to a new truth. The savage alpha had marked his claim. And Lily, trembling in the firelight, felt her world shift forever.
The ride to Gabriel's den was made in silence. Wolves flanked them on either side, their shadows long in the moonlight. The gathering grounds had scattered into whispers, but the weight of the alpha's decree clung to the air like smoke. Lily sat behind Gabriel on the broad black horse he favored. She kept her hands locked around the leather of the saddle, not daring to touch him, not daring to shift. His presence was too close, too overwhelming. She could feel the steady strength in him even when he did not speak. The forest swallowed them whole, branches arching overhead, moonlight trickling through in fractured beams. The hooves struck the earth in a rhythm that matched her racing heart. Every step took her further from Marcus, yet no closer to freedom. Gabriel's den rose from the cliffs like something carved by the wild itself. Stone walls jutted up from the earth, sharp and unyielding. Torches burned along its entrance, their light spilling across the heavy wooden gates. It was not a home, it was a fortress. The gates opened at his approach. Guards bowed their heads, stepping aside. Their eyes flicked to Lily, curiosity burning, but none dared to question aloud. She felt the weight of their stares all the same. Inside, the den was vast, its walls of stone draped with wolf pelts and iron sconces. The air smelled of smoke, steel, and something darker, power layered into every stone. Gabriel dismounted first, turning to her with a command in his gaze. She slid down awkwardly, her bare feet touching the cold ground. He studied her for a moment, unreadable. "You'll stay here now." Lily's mouth went dry. Here? With him? She wanted to ask why, to demand answers, but the words knotted in her throat. She had never spoken freely, never been allowed to. Her silence was an old habit that clung tighter than chains. A servant appeared, bowing deeply. "Alpha?" "Take her to the east wing," Gabriel ordered. His voice held no softness, only authority. "She is under my protection. No harm is to touch her. If it does, you answer to me." The servant's eyes widened, but he only nodded quickly. "Yes, Alpha." Lily followed, her steps slow, her chest tight. The east wing was quieter, its halls long and lined with heavy doors. The room she was given was larger than the attic she had known all her life, its bed wide, its fire already burning. It should have felt like luxury. It should have felt like safety. But as she sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the flames, she felt only the weight of unseen bars. She was no longer Marcus's prisoner, but she was still a prisoner all the same. The savage alpha had built her a new cage, one of stone and fire instead of dust and wood. And this one, she feared, would be far harder to escape.
The days after the gathering passed in uneasy silence. Lily remained in the east wing, surrounded by stone walls that felt more like a cage than protection. Servants brought food but avoided her eyes. Guards lingered at the hall's ends, not for her sake, but to watch. Word had spread. The savage alpha had claimed her, and now the pack whispered. She tried to lose herself in sketches, but the charcoal trembled in her hand. Her uncle's face haunted her, his rage, his slap, and behind that, Gabriel's eyes, burning gold, sharp as a blade, the promise of violence barely restrained. One evening, she wandered into the inner courtyard to breathe. Moonlight spilled across the stone floor, pale and silver. For a moment, she let herself imagine she was free, the night her only companion. Then a shadow moved. "Little Omega," a voice drawled. Damon stepped from the darkness, his smirk as sharp as his scent, spiced arrogance and dominance. His eyes roved over her, unkind, unyielding. "The Alpha shelters you now, does he?" Strange choice. He should know better than to waste power on scraps. Lily stiffened, her pulse quickening. She edged back, but Damon followed, circling like a predator toying with prey. "You'd do better with me," he murmured. "Gabriel is cursed, dangerous. His temper will kill you one day. But I—" He leaned closer, his breath hot against her ear. "I could make you useful, give you purpose, give you—" A growl cut him short. It rolled from the shadows, low and feral, vibrating through the stone beneath her feet. Damon froze, his smirk faltering. Gabriel stepped into the moonlight. His presence filled the courtyard, his eyes glowing with molten fury. He moved like a storm given flesh. "Step away," Gabriel commanded, his voice edged with steel. Damon's jaw clenched, but he forced a laugh. "I was only speaking with her." "You were trespassing." Gabriel advanced, his shoulders broad, his every step deliberate. "And you forgot yourself." The growl deepened, and for an instant Lily saw it. The shadow behind his eyes, the beast pressing against his skin. His hands trembled, his chest rose and fell too quickly. It was as if he fought something inside, something vast and merciless. Damon lifted his chin, but he backed away, hands raised in mock surrender. "Careful, Alpha. Show the pack too much of your temper, and they'll remember why they call you savage." Gabriel's snarl answered him, the sound more beast than man. Damon turned sharply and disappeared into the shadows, but not before casting Lily a final look, half warning, half promise. Silence fell. Gabriel stood rigid, his breathing harsh, his hands still trembling. For one terrifying heartbeat, Lily thought he might turn that fury on her. But he only closed his eyes, forcing the beast back down, burying it in silence. When he spoke, his voice was raw. "Stay away from him." Then he turned and vanished into the dark, leaving Lily trembling in the courtyard, the echo of his growl lingering in the stone.
The east wing of Gabriel's den was quiet. Too quiet for Lily's restless thoughts. The walls were thick, the windows narrow slits that let in only the faintest shimmer of moonlight. By day, the stone seemed cold and lifeless. By night, it breathed. She lay awake long after the fire had burned low, her eyes tracing the cracks in the ceiling. Sleep would not come. Her uncle's sneer, the sting of his hand, Gabriel's voice claiming her protection, all of it tangled in her mind until it was a knot she could not undo. At last, she rose. Barefoot, she padded into the corridor, the chill of the stone floor biting at her skin. The halls stretched long and empty, their silence broken only by the occasional flicker of a torch. She told herself she was only walking to clear her thoughts, but her steps pulled her deeper into the fortress. Down one stairwell, then another, until she found herself in a corridor she had not seen before. The walls here were older, rougher, the stones worn with time. Carvings stretched along them, wolves running beneath moons, spirals that coiled like storms. She reached out, her fingertips brushing the grooves. The stone was cold, yet something thrummed beneath it, a faint vibration, like the beat of a distant heart. And then she heard it, a whisper. At first she thought it was her imagination, some echo of her own breath, but it came again, soft, layered, as though many voices spoke together. The sound seeped from the stone itself. Daughter of the moon. Lily froze, her hand pressed against the wall. Her throat tightened. She had heard that phrase once before, in a half-forgotten story her mother used to tell when she was small. But her mother was gone, and the stories were buried with her. The whispers grew clearer, curling around her like smoke. The savage king is bound. The beast grows restless. Only the blood of the first wolves can tame or destroy. Her pulse quickened. She wanted to pull away, to run back to her room and shut the door. But she could not move. The voices held her, ancient and knowing. A torch sputtered behind her. She turned sharply and nearly collided with Elder Grace. The old she-wolf's eyes gleamed in the dim light, sharp and watchful. She leaned on her staff, her expression unreadable. "You hear them," she murmured, more statement than question. Lily swallowed hard. What are they?" Grace's gaze swept the carvings, her mouth set in a grim line. Whispers of the bloodline curse, warnings carved into stone so fools would not forget. Few can hear them still. Lily's stomach twisted. Why me? The elder studied her in silence for a long moment, then turned away. "Because, child, perhaps you are not as ordinary as you've been led to believe."
The full moon hung high when the pack gathered again. Torches ringed the circle, their flames snapping in the restless wind. Wolves shifted on the edges, voices low, the tension sharp enough to taste. Tonight was no trial, no punishment. Tonight was something more dangerous. Lily stood near the back, her stomach knotted. Gabriel had not spoken to her since the courtyard. He had only ordered her to attend, his voice leaving no room for refusal. She felt every stare as if it were claws raking her skin. The savage alpha's protection had marked her, but not as safe, as a target. Damon strode into the circle, his confidence loud in every step. He wore a smile that was all teeth, his dark eyes sweeping the crowd before settling on Lily. "Brothers, sisters," he began, spreading his arms wide, "our alpha protects the weak. Noble, perhaps, but I would see strength preserved, tradition upheld." Murmurs stirred. Damon thrived on them. He turned, his gaze cutting toward Lily like a blade. "This Omega has been hidden too long in shadows. If she is to remain among us, let her stand with purpose. Let her stand with me." The words dropped like stones in water. Shock rippled through the pack. A claim, a public one. Lily's breath caught. The circle seemed to close around her, eyes narrowing, whispers swelling. Damon's smirk grew, certain of his power. To challenge Gabriel directly was dangerous, but to use tradition as his weapon, it was clever. Marcus stepped from the crowd, his face sharp with satisfaction. "She is of my blood," he announced. "I approve this claim." Gasps broke. Some wolves nodded, others shifted uneasily. Marcus's approval gave Damon weight. Together they thought to corner the alpha. Gabriel moved then, stepping into the firelight. His presence silenced the whispers instantly. The flames bent in the wind as if bowing to him alone. His golden eyes found Damon. "You presume much." Damon's smirk didn't falter. "I follow tradition. An Omega without bond is free to be claimed, unless you mean to keep her for yourself." The crowd stirred again, eager, restless. Gabriel's jaw tightened, his shoulders coiled like a predator ready to strike. For a moment, Lily thought he would lunge, that blood would stain the circle. But Gabriel only stepped closer, his voice dropping to something colder than ice. "You mistake silence for consent. She is not yours to claim, not now, not ever." The growl that followed his words rolled through the wolves, primal and absolute. Heads bowed, throats bared. Even Damon's smirk faltered, his confidence cracking under the weight of Gabriel's fury. The savage alpha had spoken, and though no bond had been declared, the pack understood. Lily was his.
The archives smelled of dust and ink, a repository of the pack's remembered sins. Lily moved between the stacks with a torch cupped against the cold, the light shivering over spines and broken leather. Here the fortress felt oldest, stone that had listened to generations and kept its own counsel. She had come for something more than curiosity. The whispers in the stone left a hollow she could not ignore, and Elder Grace's warning sat in her like a live coal. If the prophecy had named a daughter of the moon, then the answer to why might be written where the pack kept its truths. At a low table, she found a ledger marked for her line. The cover split when she opened it, the pages brittle. Names marched down the page, births, bonds, deaths, until she reached the familiar names of her parents. A symbol beside them caught her eye, a crescent looped with thorn. The ink had faded, but the mark was clear enough to startle her. Part of the page had been crudely scraped away. Letters were gouged as if someone had tried to erase history by force. Beneath the scar, faint strokes suggested one word: Lycan. Lycan, the oldest blood. The moon's first wolves. Legends said their touch altered fate. The syllable in her mind felt like a key falling into place. More notes filled the margins in a different hurried hand. Warnings. Suppress, cleanse, for the safety of the pack. Someone had ordered the erasure, not by accident, but by design. Whoever had done it had been careful to hide their hand. A shadow moved at the archive's arch. Elder Thomas stood framed by the doorway, a lantern in his calloused grip. His eyes were tired. "These rooms are not for wandering," he said, though there was no anger in him. "You knew," Lily said. The torchlight trembled in her grasp. "You knew this was here. Why was Lycan erased? Why my mother?" Thomas's jaw worked. He stepped closer and, with a reverence some reserved only for relics, brushed the edge of the ledger. "Old fear," he said. "Once, they feared the blood so much they rewrote what they could. They called the unknown witchcraft and stamped it down." "Stamped it down," Lily echoed, tasting the phrase like bile. If the pack had hidden her mother's truth, then Marcus's cruelty might be built on a lie. Thomas's face softened. "There are minutes, letters, council decrees," he offered. "But they are locked in other places, sealed for a reason. Fear contours every decision our ancestors made." She laid her hand flat on the page where the crescent remained. It warmed oddly against her palm, as if the mark remembered being touched. "Find me everything," she said. "Every record that mentions Lycan, every note that names my family. I will read them all." The elder hesitated only a heartbeat before nodding. "You will have the records," he said. "But know this truth can claw at you, child. Knowledge frees, but it also binds." As she collected the pages, the ledger's faint symbol burned a slow, steady echo into her mind. Lycan. The word thrummed, not as danger alone, but as something that had waited for her to remember.
Night smelled of rain and old paper in the private wing. Torches had been banked low. The archive shelves stood like dark teeth. Lily moved between them, clutching the ledger, its weight a small, stubborn truth against her ribs. Gabriel waited in an alcove, half in shadow. He looked less like a king there, and more like anything that had been broken and kept intact. When she handed him the ledger, he accepted it with a reverence that softened his hard lines. He found the crescent mark and paused. "It shouldn't be hidden," Lily said. The words came out thin. "Why erase it?" He closed his eyes as if the answer were a blade. "Fear," he said finally. "Fear will make people forget the names that frighten them." They stood close in that hush, where the archives kept their own counsel. The bond between them, the invisible thread the elders talked of, buzzed faint and urgent. Lily felt it as a pull inside her chest, a tug that answered something in him. Gabriel stepped forward until the lamp's light skated across his face. "I told myself I would not let it happen," he murmured, "that I would be stronger than the blood that cursed me. She touched his hand before thinking, a quiet reach that steadied more than it trembled. The warmth of his skin startled her. In that small contact, the world narrowed until only breath and heartbeats remained. He tilted his head as if toward a memory, eyes wet with something raw. For a single moment his restraint faltered. He leaned in, an intent to close the space that had never been closed before. Lily felt the pull to return it, an answering hunger that was part fear, part longing. She imagined a kiss that would seal them together, that might rewrite the prophecy, or at least bend it. The air vibrated. The ledger lay half forgotten in his other hand. Then he drew back. The movement was sharp, like a knife being pulled free. Shame washed his face. "I can't," he said, voice breaking. "Not now." "Why?" Her whisper carried more hurt than she intended. "Afraid of what?" He swallowed, the sound rough. "Afraid of losing myself. Afraid of the thing inside me taking you with it." The confession was an iron weight dropped between them. Lily's palm pressed against his chest where his heart beat loud. It steadied, stubborn. "Or afraid of loving," she offered, the words trembling but fierce. "It is one or the other, Gabriel." He closed his eyes, the line of his jaw working. When he spoke, there was nothing of the king's armor, only a man. "Both," he admitted. "Both and more." They stood in the archive's dim light and let the unsaid settle. The almost kiss became a promise and offense, a tender wound neither of them could yet heal. Outside, the den breathed, the night keeping its secrets. Inside, two people learned that desire could be a salvation and a weapon, and that sometimes the bravest thing was to wait.
Elder Grace kept her small chamber as if the wider world should not be trusted with its contents. Shelves crowded with carved tokens and dusk-worn tomes lined the stone, and a single lamp burned low. Lily entered with the ledger pressed to her chest, the weight of its truth a steady thrum. Grace studied her with a slow kindness, measuring how much the girl could carry. "You have read what you should not," she said. "Now you must hear what you were born to hold." Lily's fingers found the crescent mark as if by habit. "Lycan," she said, the word small and obscene in her mouth. "What are they?" "Lycan are the old blood," Grace replied. "Children of the moon, those first wolves touched by lunar favor. Their power frightened our ancestors. So the pack did what frightened people always do. They erased names, burned pages, and wrote new law." Grace fetched a thin scroll, its leather dry and fragile. She unrolled it and read with a voice that trembled only once. The words came like a cry from the deep past. "A king of savage blood will rise, his reign a storm of fire and might. His soul will be claimed by a daughter of the moon, who will either tether the beast and bring the dawn, or shatter his soul and bring the endless night." The prophecy landed in Lily's chest like cold iron. Images uncoiled, fur and flame, a crown heavy with blood, a girl under a silver moon whose touch could steady or destroy. "Prophecy points," Grace said, folding the scroll. "It does not march the road for you. It names a fork. Some will see hope. Others will see a tool." Lily asked the hardest question. "Why hide my mother's name? Why hide Lycan?" Grace's old hands trembled as she answered. "Fear. The elders feared power without control. They feared what the line could mean for order. So they chose to bury truth to keep what they called stability. But burying a name does not kill it." A distant clamor from the den reminded them the pack's life was coarser than prophecy. Outside, lives were being bartered, and blood was still washing underfoot. Grace's eyes fixed on Lily. The curse in his blood is eating at him. It will not wait politely for a savior to arrive. If the bond between a king and a daughter of the moon is true, it may anchor him, or it may throw him further into darkness. That is the cruelty. The same thing that can heal may also destroy. Lily pressed her palms to the ledger until her knuckles rose. What if I refuse? Grace's look was both sorrow and stubborn truth. Refusal will not spare you. Others will use your name. The pack will demand an answer, a face to fear or to rally behind. You will be chosen by fate or by hands that think they command it. The lamp guttered and threw a weak light that pooled like a small moon. Lily felt the prophecy settle, not as a sentence, but as a terrible possibility. For the first time since Marcus's hand, she understood that the next move might be hers to make.
News of the planned bonding spread fast. Damon and Marcus sharpened their move with ceremony and law until it looked inevitable. They spoke of tradition and stability. They called it closing a scandal. The High Elder had been leaned on, the heralds quietly briefed. It would be public, they said, and the pack would witness justice. Lily heard the plan as if someone else spoke of her life. Marcus presented it as mercy, an anchor to a stronger hand, but his eyes glinted with triumph. The ledger felt heavier against her ribs. She had expected schemes, not the brazen pace with which they now unfolded. The ceremonial clearing was dressed in old symbols. Braided cords of wolf hair and moon silver lay coiled, a ritual knife rested on velvet, and the High Elder's robes gleamed with the gravity of law. The pack gathered, low murmurs rising like a tide. On the morning of the ceremony, Lily was led through a side path, shielded from the worst of the crowd's gaze. Marcus moved close, his steps a show of possession. Damon's men formed a solid ring around the dais. He wore his claim like armor, composed and sharp. The High Elder lifted his hands and began the old chant, voice grinding like gravel. Damon stepped forward, bent low, and took Lily's hand. His touch was cool, practiced, ritual disguised as courtesy. He drew the ceremonial blade, nicked his palm, and flicked a bead of blood onto his finger for the witness of the pack. Tradition demanded shared blood, an outward mark of fate. Damon pressed that warm smear against Lily's wrist with theatrical ceremony. The crowd murmured its approval. Some faces carried cruel satisfaction. The ritual turned intimacy into law. Lily felt the silk of her dress scrape like a shroud. Her pulse hammered as the blade's red stain warmed her skin. The ledger at her chest was a small, impotent barrier. Marcus bowed with a smug, public piety. The cords were brought forward, braided hands working with precise, practiced motion. The High Elder's words stitched meaning into the air, binding the moment with the force of custom. Lily thought of Gabriel, his protection and the word he had spoken that shifted the pack's balance. She thought of the bone crescent and the ledger's scraped margins. The knowledge of Lycan blood made this moment more than a personal theft. It was a political gambit. Silence swelled until it felt like a living thing. As Damon lifted the cord to place it around her wrist, his fingers hovered a heartbeat before closing. The clearing held its breath. Then a sound, impossible and sharp, cleaved through the hush, an arrival that made every wolf turn.
The ceremonial clearing held its breath. Torches bent in uneasy wind as Damon lifted the braided cord, its strands gleaming in the flame. Marcus watched with a patient hunger. The High Elder intoned the old words that turned ritual into law. Lily stood like a small thing at the center, feeling the cord's weight as if it were already a shackle. Then the doors slammed inward. Wood exploded, splinters flying, and a cold wind carried the scent of smoke and iron. A figure filled the breach and moved into the light with the inevitability of nightfall. Gabriel walked as if pulled by a predator's need. His clothes were scuffed, hair loose about his face, and his presence pushed the torchlight back. He paused only long enough to take in the scene, the cord, Damon's smug face, Marcus's thin smile, and his gaze found Lily. The silence broke with him. "You will not bind her," he said, voice low but certain, slicing through the High Elder's chant. Damon straightened. "This is tradition," he snapped. "The pack decides." "The pack will not be used to hide cruelty," Gabriel cut him off. His eyes traveled to Marcus, the man who had raised his hand to Lily. "You struck her before the pack. You will answer." Damon surged forward, fury making him clumsy. Gabriel met him halfway and took his wrist in a movement sharp and efficient. The rope in Damon's hand slipped free. The crowd gasped as Damon stumbled back into the dirt, the ritual blade falling to the ground. The High Elder protested, hands raised in ritual authority, but his voice quelled beneath Gabriel's next words. Gabriel stepped before Lily and reached for her hand. The motion was not sudden, it was inevitable. He touched the side of her face, thumb brushing the cheek that still reddened from Marcus's slap. "You are mine," he said. The words were simple, brutal, and they carried like an unspoken law. Mine before all. At that naming, something answered. A thin silver thread of light wove between them, catching torchlight and breath alike. Wolves shifted. Some bowed, others stared as if seeing the world altered. The braided cord in Damon's limp fingers lay forgotten. Marcus's face drained of color. Damon scrambled to his feet, rage and humiliation burning his features. But the pack had heard the Alpha's claim, and the air itself had changed. The High Elder stammered, searching for precedent. None met the moment. Gabriel kept his hand on Lily, grounding her as the clearing's gravity reoriented. For a woman who had been used, traded, and threatened, to be named like that, before all, changed the rules without asking permission. She felt the press of every eye, the weight of a new thing settling between them. Outside the ripple of torches, the den's stones seemed to hold their breath. The ceremony had not tied Lily to Damon. It had been broken apart and rewoven in a new pattern. The savage Alpha had declared her as his, and the pack, watching, began to turn.
Gabriel's private wing opened into a chamber that smelled of smoke and iron, a hearth roaring at its center, maps on the walls, furs piled on a wide bed. It was a den, not a palace, honest and severe. Guards stepped back, their eyes lowered. Whatever claim Gabriel had made carried weight here. Lily entered with her knees hollow under her. She had expected commands. Instead, he moved around the room like a man testing a wound. When he spoke, his voice was low, more confessing than commanding. "You will stay close," he said. "There are wolves who will take kindness for weakness. I won't let them take you." He met her eyes. Behind the firmness was a tired fear. "I can protect you, but I can also fail." She perched on the edge of the furred bed, fingers twisting the hem of her skirt. "Teach me," she said, "not to hide, but to stand." It was the smallest of protests, but it carried all the weight of her life. Gabriel sat across from her and spoke plainly. Patrol routes, signals huntsmen used, how to read a wolf's step for intent. The talk was practical. Tools instead of promises. It gave Lily something the addict never had. Knowledge. With each small fact, she felt less like a thing to be guarded and more like someone who might answer for herself. Night thinned. The hearth's glare softened into coals. In the silence, Lily watched the line of Gabriel's jaw, the way his hand flexed when memory drew too sharp. She understood then that his restraint cost him something. Sleep, peace, a steadier self. It was a cost he bore alone. When the room had become all shadow and breath, he reached for her. His hand closed around hers with quiet deliberation, like a vow. There was a pause, 2 hollowed breaths where both decided what to risk, and then he leaned in. Their kiss was not soft. It was fierce and grave, a claim that was also a plea. Gabriel's hold steadied Lily, while his need laid bare the part of him that feared becoming a monster. For Lily it was more than rescue, it was recognition, a joining that shifted the shape of both their lives. They lay curled in the furs afterward, cautious and not yet tender. The den held them like a secret. There would be politics and plots and the old ledger's secrets to unravel. Yet in those hours Gabriel and Lily had made something simple and dangerous. They had given each other a first fragile trust that might hold against the dark or might break with it. A sliver of the clearing's memory cut through her. his words that had named her mine before all, and the ledger's crescent seemed both a threat and a promise. She traced her thumb across his knuckles and felt the tremor there. In the thin night, they were fragile allies, two beings bound by a claim that was not yet law, but had already altered the map of their lives.
The den had worn a fragile calm since Gabriel's claim. Under that quiet old ambitions moved like knives. Marcus worked his angles with practiced patience, and Edward Tyrrell fed the council's appetite for precedent. Together they began to turn superstition into a weapon. They seeded the idea steadily. "Have you noticed how she walks at night, as if listening to the stones?" Marcus asked in public halls, voice mild enough to seem incidental. Tyrrell added legal weight. Old rights were written for a reason. If there is even a whisper of witchcraft, someone planted the token for them. Before dawn one morning, servants found a crude doll on Lily's bed. Dark hair threaded through its head, a small silver bead sewn at its throat. Marcus picked it up as if it were a relic. "Found in her room," he announced with an air of honest shock. "You see how it matches the stories?" Elder Grace arrived like a slow wind, eyes sharp beneath wrinkled lids. She handled the doll with puzzled care. "They meant this to be found," she said. "The stitches are clumsy. The dye is common. This is a prop made to frighten." Tyrrell's face hardened. "Whether prop or charm, the pack will not tolerate witchcraft." His voice carried through the den like a verdict begun. A frightened servant girl, coached, coaxed, terrified, was brought forward to testify. Under pressure, she described a night by the old well where she claimed to have heard chanting and seen Lily moving in the dark. Her testimony was halting, each sentence propped up by leading prompts from those questioning her. Yet to the ears of a superstitious assembly, it sounded damning. The High Elder convened a hearing. The puppet was placed on a cushion at the center of the circle like a mute witness. Wolves pressed close. Some watched with hungry interest, others with a reluctant pity for the girl accused. Lily protested with a voice that wavered but did not break. "I did not make it. I did not." The words clung to her throat. She held the puppet up between hands that had been taught to fear symbols, hoping to show the contrivance for what it was. But in courts and circles, what looks like proof often matters more than the truth. Marcus performed his outrage with bitter satisfaction. He spoke of lineage and danger, of the old fears that justified harsh measures. Tyrrell cited law and precedent. The council, already inclined by whispered doubts and the sight of the doll, weighed each word like a scale. Doubt is a luxury in the den. Finality is its coin. When the vote moved, the currents of power had already shifted. The puppet's thread pulled taut across the pack's throat, and Lily felt the noose as if it were already cinched. The witch's mark, crude and intentional, had become the instrument of a plot that would not be easily undone.
Gray clouds pressed low as the pack gathered. The High Elder sat solemn, the list of charges read in his clear, weary voice. Witchcraft, seduction of the alpha, endangering the pack. The gathering grounds thrummed with a restless heat. Lily stood at the center, puppet on display like a mute indictment. Torches threw light on her bare wrists. Marcus watched with a smile that tasted like triumph. Tyrrell recorded each syllable as if weighing coin. The crowd shifted. Damon's allies murmured for swift judgment. Gabriel arrived and took his place, late and heavy with movement. His eyes found Lily first, and for an instant she caught the familiar steadiness of his look. Then he turned his face away, and that hesitation landed like a stone. Elder Grace rose to speak in Lily's defense. She was careful, her voice threading through facts, the doll's crude stitches, the servant's coached testimony, the way the evidence smelled of design. Her words carried intuition and history, but fear is easy to feed and harder to starve. One by one the elders voiced their views. Marcus painted danger. Tyrrell invoked law. Damon's faction thundered for the old order. The den's air tightened, a noose forming on invisible ropes. When the High Elder asked if Gabriel would speak, all eyes snapped to him. He could have ended the trial with a single command. An alpha's voice is law. He stood, opened his mouth and closed it. Behind his gaze, something fought. Memories like embers, fire, blood, the silvered flash of blame. A sliver of doubt cleaved him. Had he truly protected those he swore to guard, or had he failed when it mattered most? That human pause unmoored the assembly. Whispers swelled into doubts. To some it looked like hesitation, to others a secret admission. Gabriel finally spoke. He challenged the evidence and urged caution, pleading with the pack to seek truth rather than vengeance. His words were tempered, not absolute. They landed like sparks, not flames. The vote moved. Fear and old debts counted heavier than mercy. The High Elder pronounced the decision. Lily would be bound and held until dawn, when a cleansing rite would decide her fate. 2 guards advanced with iron manacles that clicked a finality into the night. Lily looked at Gabriel as the shackles closed. Her eyes held an accusation that needed no voice. He had the power to stop this. He reached toward her once, his hand trembling, then drew back as if the movement itself might fracture something inside him. The iron bit cold against her wrists. As the guards led her away into the den's lower passages, the chains sang a quiet song of betrayal. Around the circle, faces hardened. Some wore relief, others shame. Gabriel's jaw tightened, a wound both visible and secret. They closed the door behind her. The echo of the key turning followed like a verdict. Doubt had not freed them. It had bound them all tighter. Protection, it seemed, required more than a claim. It required proof, or a brutality that would demand a price both would dread to pay.
Gabriel moved like a storm loosed from its leash. He did not send men. He became the rescue. Black leather and bone that drove straight for the den. Iron gates shrieked as he shoved them aside, boots pounding stone, breath hard and hot in the cold corridors below. Guards met him with spears and practiced formation, but precision was no answer to fury. He struck with a raw, brutal efficiency, each blow a line of intent. Metal rang and men fell. Their shouts thinned beneath his roar. His hands were strength and hunger made flesh. The deeper he went, the tighter the air grew. Damp stone and the tang of iron clung to him. Memory tugged his steps. The slap across Lily's face, the ledger's crescent kept at her breast, the vow he had made. Those threads led him through the maze. He found her in a narrow cell, chains biting her wrists. Her dress hung in tatters. Bruises freckled her skin. She sat small on the pallet, eyes empty as if the light inside had ebbed. The sight cut him closer than any blade. "Kneel," he told the nearest guard. The man obeyed, not from order, but from the quake in Gabriel's stance. He wrenched the iron links with hands that seemed not to know their own limits. The sound of shattered shackles was a savage hymn. When he lifted her, Lily flinched. Her body expected the cruelty the pack had trained it to accept. His hands were careful, steadier than she'd hoped. He pressed cloth to a bruise along her side. "I'm here," he said simply, voice raw. "You came," she whispered, disbelief a thin thread. "I came for you." He half laughed, half cursed. "For what you are, for what I must protect." They moved like 2 shadows through the den's lower veins, Gabriel bearing the weight she could not. Each step cost him. Cuts and bruises mapped his skin. A blade whispered past his ribs, a guard lunging from a dark stair. Pain flared, but he did not slow. Getting her out was a want that swallowed him. Near the lower hatch, resistance rose like a wall. The ambush was neat, ropes and spears waiting in the dark. Gabriel roared, an animal sound that split the corridors. He fought with the kind of fury that bends metal. For a moment the world narrowed to the motion of his arms and the shape of her pressed against him. A spear found his side then, blunt and cruel. Steel tore through leather and skin. The world went bright with pain, but he held her tighter, gritting through each breath. Lily clutched his shirt as if it were an anchor. They burst into the courtyard like a wound opened to the moon. Gabriel set her down against a low wall, his forehead bowed against hers. For a slow beat, they shared the small mercy of breath, the bitter taste of relief braided with the cost of what had been paid.
They had barely left the hatch when the courtyard erupted. Men sprang from shadow, ambush precise and brutal. Spears flashed, ropes fell. The air filled with the sharp smell of metal and the sound of bodies hitting stone. Gabriel moved like a blade. He smashed through lines, hands finding throats and wrists, sending men flailing. The fight folded around them, a raw and terrible tide. For a moment it seemed they might cut their way free. Marcus appeared then, stepping through the chaos with a calm that made Gabriel's blood run cold. In his hand glinted a dagger, black-laced and cruel. His eyes shone with something that was not grief, but hunger. "You think you can undo what was arranged?" Marcus called, voice flat. He lunged. The knife found Lily before delays could be measured. She cried out, a small, helpless sound. Gabriel lunged, but men and steel closed around him. He carved toward her, fury like a living thing, but Marcus's blade had bitten home. Lily's knees folded. A warm burn spread across her side. She crawled through the scuffed stone, blood dark on her palms, and gripped Gabriel's shirt. Marcus loomed over them, cruelty like a sermon. "Your parents were problems," he spat. "I set things right." His words were meant to wound as deeply as the steel. Gabriel shattered the line, tearing into Marcus with a feral force that showed no law left to bind him. Hands and metal flew. The courtyard became a chaos of flung bodies and frantic snarls. He reached Marcus, ripping and smashing with a violence that left the man broken and bleeding. But the poison in the blade worked slow and sure. Dark spread beneath Lily's wound like ink crawling on paper. Her breaths came shorter, a ragged count. Her fingers loosened on Gabriel's shirt. "No," Gabriel said once, a sound that was not human and not wholly a plea. He held her, pressed his mouth to her brow, and the world narrowed to the beat of a failing heart. Lily managed a faint smile, eyes dim but fixed on him. "It wasn't his fault," she whispered, meaning the night her parents died. She tried to speak his name. The syllable was a surrender and a blessing. Her body stilled and the breath left her. Silence fell as if a hand had dropped over the den. The pack around them stood torpid and stunned, the earlier hunger gone. Gabriel's scream rose, a sound that tore at stone and sky, a raw grief that would not be contained. He clutched her body, felt the life slipping like sand through his fingers, and saw the moonlight thicken above them as if the night itself leaned in to witness the dying of what had been fragile hope.
Gabriel's scream cracked open the night. It began as grief and folded into something older, a long animal howl that made the den's stones shiver. Torches guttered as if the air itself had changed. Pain lanced his spine as bone and muscle remembered a shape gone dormant. His hands reformed into claws. His senses sharpened until the world tasted of iron and fur. Instincts rose: hurt, hunt, protect. Each one a hot, sharp command. The hunger that had frightened elders for generations threaded through his ribs. Inside the onrush was a strange clarity. Memory and instinct braided. Images of fires, a child's cry, an old dagger blinking in torchlight, flickered like fractured stars. He felt the weight of every accusation lodged against him across seasons, the shame he'd carried for a massacre he now suspected was not wholly his. Those memories sharpened the beast's teeth rather than dulling them. They made his need for retribution personal and volcanic. Wolves reacted like weather. Some fled, others bowed, an instinct older than law. Men cast spears, but steel glanced off new, dense muscle. Gabriel moved with brutal speed, a dark shape twice the size of a wolf, and the courtyard became a wilderness of flying bodies and ragged cries. His mind narrowed to a single bright point. Marcus. The uncle who had raised a hand to a girl now found himself at the mercy of something that did not reason. Gabriel tore and smashed with a ferocity that rewrote men's faces. Bones broke with sounds that were part crack, part bell. Those who had plotted and schemed found themselves prey beneath a footfall that had once carried a crown. The den's order unraveled. Elders who had weighed laws now met hunger and blood. Damon's allies ran with their claims forgotten. Tyrell's counsel scattered like paper in wind. The savage beast did not seek rule. He sought an uncontainable retribution, and the pack's politics were meaningless under his stride. When motion eased, Gabriel stood amid ruin, heaving and black. The moon hung low, indifferent and white. He turned and saw Lily, small and pale against the stone, her blood an obscene map. The beast's breath hitched. A sound that threaded grief and something almost human rose from his chest. As if the night answered, a thin silver poured from the moon. It gathered at Lily's wound like water accepting a stone, a quiet that wrapped her in light. The beast's fury shivered. In that fragile wash he felt a hope so sharp it hurt. His next howl carried two notes, wrath and a raw, urgent plea. The den trembled. Pack and man listened, stunned. The savage king was unmade and remade into a creature of legend. The night would hold his howl like a new law, and under the moonlight, something stirring began to watch over the fallen girl.
The courtyard felt hollowed out, a heart cut open and left exposed. Torches sputtered, bodies lay scattered like ragged proof of violence. Gabriel cradled Lily's small form, blood staining the white of her dress. His howl had emptied the night. On its echo hung a stunned, fearful quiet. Then the moon changed, drifting from behind cloud to shine full and cold. Silver light pooled across the stones and gathered at Lily's wound, cool and bright as a finger of ice. The air shifted. Even the guards lowered their heads as if drawn by a tide. From the old stones came the whispers, those same thin voices that had tugged at Lily in the den. Daughter of the moon. They breathed, a chorus threaded with command and recognition. The sound wound into the moonlight and wrapped around her like a shawl. Lily's breath was shallow, too shallow to be hope. Her mind floated beyond the body, weightless and strange, and she saw shapes, a woman with a crescent scar who smiled without surprise, a child running under a moon that taught the feet how to run. Memory was not memory but inheritance. Names slid into place inside her like keys in old locks. A hand touched her forehead, not human, cool as riverstone, and warmth pooled into her chest. The poison that had been eating her slowed as if confronted by an older law. The moonlight did not mend by force. It offered a choice. Return and take the blood. Return and carry its weight. She chose. The choice made a small sound, a breath like a bell. Her fingers twitched, her eyelids fluttered. When she opened her eyes, they were ringed faintly with silver. Clarity steadied the small pupils. The repertory of her blood hummed in her bones. Lycan, daughter of the moon, more lineage than miracle. Gabriel felt it before she spoke, a subtle easing of the beast's pressure at the edge of his control. He leaned over her, voice raw. "Stay with me," he begged, a plea more animal than king. She answered with a single steadying whisper, "I am here." Around them the pack watched, part reverence and part fear. Elder Grace moved forward through the wreckage, his face lined with an old mixture of awe and dread. The High Elder bowed, ritual weight of their roles cracking beneath something older than law. Lily sat up slowly, breath shuddering but present. The courtyard's air felt different, charged, like the hush before a season changes. She did not understand everything that had happened to her, nor did she yet feel the shape of the power within her, but she felt it as a thread beneath skin. Ancestors' names, a pull toward the moon, a responsibility threaded with danger. Her hand found Gabriel's, and he curled his fingers around it as if to anchor himself. For a moment neither of them spoke. The moon had returned her, and in doing so shifted the map of what the pact might become. The truth had been reborn with her, fragile and sharp. When she finally breathed out, her voice was quiet but unyielding. "We have work," she said, and the words were a vow more than a promise. The pack leaned close, listening for how the first breath of that vow would shape the night to come.
Dawn softened the wreckage into a bruise. Gabriel bore Lily to the archive where memory kept its scars in brittle paper. Word moved ahead of them. The den gathered with torches and questions. The pack wanted a shape for its fear. Gabriel wanted a single thing more urgent than law: the truth. Elder Grace drew a hidden folio from a shelf seam. Among council minutes and ledger pages, they found a folded note, sealed with wax long dulled. The handwriting was small, precise. Marcus's. The words were colder than breath. Cleanse the line, remove the taint, blame rogues, burn the proof. It listed logistics: the night to strike, roads to send men down, places to vanish weapons. Lily read with a stillness that was not shock but a kind of steady collapse. The Lycan memories, the flash of flame, the scream, the silver blade, snapped into place. The ledger's scraped margins were not mischance but method. The names had been erased by design. Marcus had drafted the plan. The old king had signed it. They had buried the deed under law. When Gabriel hauled Marcus before the council, he did it with the ruin of a man who had been remade by grief. Torches carved accusing light across the accused's face. Marcus did not flinch. Pride hardened him like a shield. "You wrote it," Gabriel said. "You orchestrated the night. You sent them into a fire and framed rogues." Marcus answered with the dry patience of an accountant. "I preserved the pack," he said. His voice had no remorse, only cold conviction. "Sometimes preservation requires harsh measures." "You murdered my friends," Gabriel growled, the beast under his skin a taut thing. Lily stepped forward. Ledger clutched to her chest. Her voice was low but steady. "They were my parents," she said. "You called them traitors and erased them. You used crown and law to hide a lie." A murmur ran through the crowd. Shock, shame, a sudden mortal clarity. Some wolves clenched fists. Others turned away, unwilling to meet what collusion had done to their law. Marcus's eyes flicked for allies and found too many blank faces. He did not deny the handwriting. He offered instead a frozen justification. "History keeps a pack safe. I chose a hard path to protect our future." The words fell like cold stone. That reasoning cleaved the assembly. For some, fear nodded. Better a harsh hand than chaos. For others, betrayal became a wound that would not heal. Gabriel felt the old hunger rise, a dark animal that wanted retribution. He tamped it down with a violence that left him shaking. Truth did not tidy the den. It unmade a seam. The revelation opened old wounds and lit a new fuse. Lily felt the Lycan pull in her blood, a power that could steady the beast or shatter him, and realized the pack would not remain as it had been. Marcus had burned a history to secure his vision of order, and the cost of that order would now be paid in a war that would rearrange pack and heart alike.
Dawn found the den with edges softened by smoke and the brittle calculus of broken loyalties. Marcus's exposure had not simply unmasked a murderer. It split the pack into factions that measured survival differently. Some elders clung to Tyrell's notion that harsh choices preserved order. Others, newly shamed, walked away from the old guard, unable to stomach a history bought with blood. Damon withdrew into the wild margins, nursing wounds and plotting vengeance. Young hunters and scouts, jittery with the possibility of a future less bound by fear, gravitated toward Gabriel. They wanted change more than a return to a law propped up by lies. Lily moved through this shifting weather with the ledger pressed to her ribs. The pages were proof, yes, but they were also a burden. People looked to her for answers as if lineage alone could be a substitute for counsel. She met villagers and hunters, listening to where anger pooled and where grief hollowed families clean. In the council chamber she found herself speaking, though she had not meant to command. "We can unmake the lie," she said, voice steady, "but we must decide how to live after." Some demanded immediate retribution, others begged for trials bound by law, fear leaning one way or the other. Gabriel stood beside her like a shadow learning to be an anchor. He had the visceral strength of violence and was learning restraint. That balance bought him followers. It also bred doubt. He listened to proposals for patrols and new watches, for shared records, so history could not be burned again. Marcus was shackled where proof could reach him, his face a portrait of cold conviction. Damon's name smoldered in the margins as a threat that had not been quelled. Tyrell retreated into legalism, his coalition weakened but not entirely dead. The den had become a map of trenches, each meeting a front line, each hearth a debating ground. Outside the council's stone, the fracture reached ordinary life. Who guarded which routes, which hunts were given priority, how pups would be taught the pack's past. Small disputes became symbolic, and every choice felt like a referendum on truth itself. Lily began to travel the pack's paths daily, stitching together small reconciliations, a shared hunt here, a spoken apology there. She realized leadership would not come from declaration, but from actions that held against the temptation to replace law with vendetta. By nightfall, the den had not healed, but a new shape showed in the cracks. Not a single rule, but a fragile willingness among some to try truth as a foundation. The question remained whether that willingness could survive the pressure that Damon and hungry rivals would bring to bear.
Damon's campaign of attrition turned bold and brutal. He struck at dawn along the southern ridge, where outlying hunters sheltered their families. Sheds burned, wood spat flame, and arrows drank the early light. The intent was not only death, but to fracture the den's calm, to make fear a tool that could be wielded against cohesion. Gabriel met the assault with a harder design than brute force. He had drilled patrols through the week, taught men to use gullies and ridgelines as traps, and set fast signals to bring reinforcements. His leadership that day was a map of motion. Hold a point, bleed the attacker, then strike where they were weakest. He bled under the effort, his hands cracked and smudged with the blood of friend and foe alike. The battle was a tangle of bodies and prayers. Hunters who'd smiled at dawn found themselves a moment later pressed against cold earth. The den's loyalists moved like a machine trained in sorrow, stoic, raw, precise. But the cost was there. Friends down, families broken, names carved into silence. At a pivotal turn, a group of young hunters were trapped in a crook between two rocks. Panic fluttered up through them like a bird desperate to flee. Lily saw them from the ridge, a pale, frantic knot, and ran. She did not run to fight. She ran to hold the place where training could work. She stepped between the hunters and the pincer and sang. A slow, ancient cadence, not words. A sound like moonlight striking water. Something in the attackers shifted. Not all were moved, but enough faltered. Men who had been driven by spite loosened for an instant. Arrows strayed. Panic thinned into drilled response. Gabriel seized the change. He drove forward with the den's core, turning a near disaster into a rout. Damon's men scattered. Some fled into the timber. Others were cut down. The tide of battle broke where the cadence had made space. Damon himself met Gabriel in the chaos. Two driven men colliding with history between them. The duel was hard and brief. Gabriel's grip snapped Damon's pride. The rival fled, wounded and humiliated, his small army dissolving into the woods. The aftermath was raw. The den counted losses. More were hurt than the tally had first suggested. Some would not rise again. Yet the victory mattered. The ledger was brought forward and read aloud in the central clearing, its facts laid plain. Truth had a salve-like effect. When names were known and crimes tallied, rumor lost oxygen. Lily's presence, her immediate care at the trapped hunters, the strange hush that had eased the ridge, shifted many opinions. Wolves who had hesitated now offered their shoulder. Gabriel's leadership, tempered by strategy and the visible cost he accepted, earned deeper trust. Still, the victory left open wounds. Damon's shadow would not vanish overnight. His allies would lick wounds and plot. The den had bought itself breath, not peace. But the day proved a crucial thing. The pack could be defended by strategy and compassion rather than by the cruelty of hidden law. That lesson would shape the den's next choices, and it made Lily's slow rise from silent sketcher to a presence of quiet power feel less improbable.
Recovery was deliberate. The den stitched itself back together with hands calloused by labor and softened by loss. Tents were repaired, bones set, and songs altered to mention names that had been lost. The work was both pragmatic and sacred. Tending the living repaired the social fabric as much as the wounds. Gabriel, raw and scarred, met with leaders in the small hours. He was no longer only a force of instant verdicts. He listened to hunters who mapped routes, to mothers who needed stable food, to elders who feared change yet acknowledged truth. He accepted measures, rotating guards to prevent isolation, a public archive overseen by a rotating council, and a mandate to teach young wolves a fuller history. Power, he learned, could be institutionalized without becoming a cage. Lily's hand steadied many things. She taught first aid, kept public copies of the ledger, and organized communal hunts so no family went hungry while politics churned. Children were taught the old moon songs alongside practical lessons about scent and spoor. She began weekly gatherings where grievances could be aired in daylight rather than schemed over in shadows. Marcus remained bound, a bitter testament to the cost of secret preservation. Tyrell and other elders receded into quiet corners, some leaving the den, others biding time. Damon slipped into the wilds, his name a bruise that would resurface when opportunity ripened. The den's political lines remained raw, but a new ethos threaded through conversations, transparency as armor. When the council convened to legitimize Gabriel's rule again, it was a different ceremony. No gilded mantle, only a sober recognition of what had been rebuilt. Gabriel accepted not to wear glory, but to hold responsibility. He took the circlet, scarred, smeared with soot from the fight, and when he placed it, it felt heavier for truth than for ambition. Lily stood beside him as more than a symbol. She was a partner who had changed the terms of rule by tending wounds and memory. Together they initiated reforms, records open to the pack, a council with rotating seats, and training for pups steeped in true history. The Lycan thread in Lily's blood remained a watchful power. It was acknowledged, not feared, and rituals were put in place to ensure it served the pack rather than possessed it. Night settled with a different hush. The moon rose, and instead of an edge that promised either dawn or endless night, it lent a tempered light. Two wolves, an alpha tempered by cost, and a Luna reborn from erased lines, stood shoulder to shoulder. The den exhaled. The future would be slow, hard work, and filled with the choices of many. For the first time in generations, the pack had a path that might lead toward dawn together.
If you loved the story, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to join the pack. Comment your favorite part of the story and leave your reviews in the comment section. Bye for now, and see you on the next one.